Welcome back to the second lesson of the mental and emotional health unit. In this lesson, we're going to focus on self-esteem, which is another aspect or another part of mental and emotional health. In the last lesson, we focused on basic characteristics of mental and emotional health, as well as self-identity. And as I alluded to in our last lesson, self-identity and self-esteem are very closely related. And just like self-identity, self-esteem is hugely important to our mental health. If we have a low self-esteem, it's going to affect our mental health quite a bit. So developing self-esteem influences the other characteristics of good mental health, that sense of belonging, sense of purpose, etc. If we put a definition to self-esteem, it is how much you value, respect, and feel confident about yourself. So if you feel valued, loved, and accepted by others, and you value, love, and accept yourself, your overall attitude and outlook will be good. Now, when I said before that self-identity and self-esteem are closely related, I mean that in terms of each one influences the other. For example, if someone were to have a negative personal identity of themselves or a negative view of who they are, that leads them to also have low self-esteem because those two are strongly connected. So it's really important to have good self-esteem so that it will affect your overall attitude and health choices you make. If we take, as I said in our last lesson, healthful risks that can raise our self-esteem, that is going to benefit us in the long run. An example of this would be public speaking. I like to always go back to this because it's a risk that a lot of people can relate to. If someone views that as a thing that could help them learn and that practicing that skill is going to make them better, that can actually raise their self-esteem. So it's kind of also how we view situations and those healthful risks that we take. So how do we get self-esteem in the first place? How does it develop? Are we just born with it? Does it just exist? It does evolve throughout our lives, so it does change based on the different experiences that we have with people and the activities that we're involved in. And if you remember back to when we talked about personal identity and how that comes into development, that is developed in the same way. It's based on our experiences and the people we are around. So self-esteem and personal identity, this is another example of how closely they are related to each other. So as we grow up, our successes, our failures, how we're treated by our family, teachers, coaches, religious authorities, our peers, those all contribute to the creation of our self-esteem. And as we experience those different successes and failures throughout our lives, as we interact with those people in our lives, our family, our friends, our teachers, our coaches, other people in our community, that all contributes to how our self-esteem changes and is created throughout our lives. Praise and reassurance is one aspect of our lives that affects self-esteem. So when we are praised for mastering a task, or if we have a failure and we receive reassurance, our self-esteem is going to increase. It's almost like we are getting that encouragement from the people around us saying, "Oh, great job, you accomplished this." Or even when you fail, "Oh, you really tried. I could see you're trying really hard. I could see you put into a lot of effort. If you stick with it, you can eventually overcome that." So that's going to make our self-esteem increase. Conversely, if somebody was not receiving that reassurance or not receiving that praise, their self-esteem would tend to develop towards the negative end. That doesn't mean that they can't ever get out of that negative self-esteem, because we can always change our self-esteem. We can always increase it. But that's going to contribute to a lower self-esteem development. Self-esteem also increases when we conquer new challenges. So again, those health risks are going to increase our self-esteem, or if we believe we can succeed. And remember that it's okay to not succeed at new tasks and activities all of the time. But if we believe that we can, that is going to increase our self-esteem. How you react emotionally to situations also affects your self-esteem. So this includes that self-talk, which again I talked about before break when we talked about resiliency. Self-talk, or the encouragement or criticism that you give yourself, can also affect your self-esteem. So if you're in a tough situation, or really any challenging situation for yourself, think about how you talk to yourself in your mind. Are you telling yourself, I can't do this, you're the worst person ever, you're a failure? Or are you telling yourself, like, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, like The Little Engine That Could, that storybook we sometimes read when we're little? If we use that positive self-talk, that's going to strengthen our self-esteem. It's almost like you're giving yourself that encouragement and that praise or reassurance that you need that will help increase and strengthen your self-esteem. So the next time you're in a challenging situation, think about how you think or talk to yourself in that situation. If you're talking negatively to yourself, try to change that into a more positive self-talk. That is going to be better for our self-esteem and better for our mental health overall. There are also some familiar faces that having a low self-esteem takes on. And as we're going through these, see if you can pick out people in your own life or if you've ever known people sometime in your life that have had these faces of low self-esteem. So the first one is the imposter. This person acts happy and successful, but is really terrified of failure. So they feel like they mask that low self-esteem by saying, everything's great. I'm having a great time. I'm super successful. I'm living my best life. When really they have a continuous need to succeed in order to mask that low self-esteem. So when they feel like they need to succeed in order to have higher self-esteem, this leads to perfectionism. It leads to procrastination because we tend as humans not to try to think of things that are overwhelming, and sometimes that perfectionism can be overwhelming. They are very competitive because they need to succeed, right? They want to be number one, and that ultimately leads to burnout. We get tired when we are constantly thinking about things or our mind is reeling, right? When we're trying to do everything so perfect, that does make us really tired and leads to burnout. The second face of low self-esteem is the rebel. This person lives in constant fear of not being good enough and may live with anger over this. So they might exhibit their fear as anger instead of fear. They act like the opinions of others don't matter, especially with people of power. So like with a boss or a supervisor or somebody higher up than them, if you think about in their career or in school, at a teacher, an administrator, they might think, ugh, this teacher is giving me feedback on this assignment. They don't know what they're talking about. I don't care. Or they may need to prove others' criticisms don't hurt. So they kind of do that same thing. In an effort to do this, they might blame others, break rules or laws, or oppose authority. So if we go back to like that teacher-student example, which you guys can all relate to, right? A person with low self-esteem who's having that face of the rebel might say, oh, that teacher, she didn't prepare me for that test, and that's why I failed. The last face of low self-esteem is the victim. And the victim acts pretty helpless. They wait for someone to rescue them. So they do this by using self-pity or indifference as a shield against taking responsibility for changing their life. It's kind of like that woe is me, like, ugh, I can't do anything right, so I'm not even going to try. So they look repeatedly to others for guidance, which leads them to become unassertive, underachieving, and relies on others a lot in relationships. There are some consequences of having a low self-esteem because it does affect our mental health. It creates a lot of anxiety, stress, loneliness, and an increased likelihood of depression. And it causes problems with friendships and romantic relationships. If someone is having those feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and helplessness, that does put a strain on those personal relationships that we have with other people. Not that these people don't want to help them, but it does have some implications for those things. So it does affect that social side of the triangle if we think of it in terms of that. It does seriously impair academic and job performance. If someone's thinking about their low self-esteem, they might not have the motivation to do well in school or concentrate on their schoolwork or do their homework in general. It leads to an increased vulnerability to drug and alcohol abuse. So some people lean on those substances as a coping mechanism to cope with these feelings of low self-esteem, which is not a good coping mechanism. That's not a healthy coping skill. And worst of all, these negative consequences themselves reinforce the negative self-image and can take a person into a downward spiral of lower and lower self-esteem and increasingly unproductive or even actively self-destructive behavior. Just like how there are negative consequences for a low self-esteem, there are a lot of benefits of having a healthy self-esteem. A healthy self-esteem is based on our ability to assess ourselves accurately and still be accepting of who we are. So this means we can acknowledge our strengths and our weaknesses appropriately, while at the same time recognizing that we are worthy and worthwhile. So we have a purpose, a belonging in this world. A healthy self-esteem also helps you feel proud of yourself and your abilities, skills, and accomplishments. So with a healthy self-esteem, a person believes that setbacks are only failures, and they have the confidence to confront challenges and overcome them. So it's almost like they have the ability to say, oh, didn't do so well at that if maybe they didn't make the track team, even though they practiced a lot. But you know what? I tried really hard, and I did the best I could, and that's all I can put out into the world. Along with this self-confidence, though, having a healthy self-esteem gives a person the confidence to try new things, right? That's how we learn new skills and new idea and meet new people. So this would be things like joining a new sport, a new club, getting a job, and learning new tasks. In addition, people with a healthy self-esteem know that they may not be as good at some tasks as they are with others, but they don't see themselves as a failure if they don't succeed at something. It's more like they view it as something that didn't really work out this one time, but next time they're going to do better. They're going to learn from this failure and apply it to the next task. This is a chart that kind of shows you that unending or continuous cycle of how high self-esteem leads to success. So when somebody has a high self-esteem, it leads them to make an effort. Trying hard leads to success. Success leads to praise from others. Praise from others leads that person to try harder to make efforts in new areas, so it continues over into another aspect of their life. New efforts lead to new successes, which leads to more praise, and so on. So it's kind of this continuous cycle that goes around and around. When we think in terms of mental health, the whole goal is to have a high self-esteem. So if someone doesn't have a high self-esteem, there are things we can do to improve it, but change doesn't happen overnight. It can happen, but it sometimes doesn't happen right away. And there's one more thing I want to mention just about self-esteem. It changes throughout our lives, and it can change day to day. If someone has a low self-esteem today, it might just be they're having a bad day, right? When we have a bad day, that affects how we feel about ourselves. We may not feel the greatest about us. But the next day is a new day and we get to start over. So just remember that self-esteem does vary. It's okay to have a low self-esteem, but know that we can do things to change it. So once we're willing to entertain the possibility that we can change, because some people have a hard time with change, we can start to improve the way we feel about ourselves. One way to do this is to focus on our strengths and not our weaknesses. And I've said this a couple times throughout this PowerPoint presentation, but it really is too important to focus on our strengths and not what we're bad at. So what we're good at, not what we kind of criticize ourselves for. So someone who has a low self-esteem, if they give like a presentation, they might say to themselves, oh, people said they liked my presentation, but it was nowhere near as good as it should have been. I can't believe no one noticed all the places I messed up. I'm such an imposter. So that's like a negative way or a negative self-talk inside someone's brain. Someone who has a higher self-esteem or wants to increase their self-esteem has to change that into something positive. So saying something like, wow, they really liked it. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but I worked hard on that presentation and I did a good job. I'm really proud of myself. So it's really important to change that negative self-talk or that negative inner critic into a positive voice. Another strategy is not to generalize unrealistically. So be realistic. An inner voice that generalizes unrealistically says, I got an F on a test. I don't understand anything in this class. I'm such an idiot. Who am I fooling? I shouldn't be taking this class. I'm stupid and I don't belong here. So be more specific and be realistic. So somebody who is changing this, how they talk in their brain, would say something like, with the same example, I did poorly on this test, but I've done okay on all the homework. There are some things here that I don't understand as well as I thought I did, but now I have a better idea of how to prepare and what I need to work on. I've done fine in other tough classes. I'm confident and I can do this. So again, we're changing that negative self-talk into something more positive. It's also important to keep your inner voice logical. So an inner critic that makes illogical leaps would say something like, he's frowning, he didn't say anything, but I know it means that he doesn't like me. Whereas, and I think as humans, we tend to do that, right? We kind of freak out in our own heads, but it's important to challenge that illogic. Saying things like, okay, he's frowning, but I don't know why. It could have nothing to do with me. Maybe I should ask. So changing, again, how we're thinking in that inner voice. Lastly, it's important not to jump to the worst case scenario and to be objective. So someone who jumps to that worst case scenario, let's say they ask someone out and they turn them down, they're instantly going, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, I'm humiliated, and jumping to that worst case scenario of no one likes me or cares about me, I'll never find a partner, I'll always be alone. So being objective is very important in this situation because we won't jump to that worst case scenario. We're taking something, one specific thing in one scenario and applying it to a broader umbrella or like all scenarios, like everyone's going to hate us. So someone who's changing that inner voice again is going to say, ouch, that hurt. Okay, she doesn't want to go out with me, but that doesn't mean that no one does. I know I'm a nice person. I'm confident that in time I'll find someone who's as interested in me as I am in her. So it's really important that we start changing how we're talking about ourselves in our minds or talking to ourselves in our minds. Another strategy we can use to improve self-esteem is practicing self-compassion. And practicing self-compassion means treating yourself with the same empathy you would show others. And that empathy thing is huge. It's our ability to be able to put ourselves in another person's shoes and understand what they're going through. So if you think about this situation, if you had a friend who was having a hard time, you would probably be a caring and supportive friend, right? But we as humans, when we go through those same things, we tend to be really hard on ourselves. And we deserve the same treatment. So rather than focusing on evaluating yourself in those situations, instead you can acknowledge when things are difficult and give yourself some care and compassion. For example, forgive yourself when you don't do all you'd hoped. So be gentle with yourself instead of critical when things don't go the way you planned. And this can be difficult if you're not used to doing this. It's also important to recognize your humanness. We all make mistakes and are all impacted by external factors we cannot control. So accepting we are only humans helps us feel connected to other people rather than like we are enduring these experiences all alone. It's really important that we connect with other people in these same situations, because if we are isolating ourselves and thinking that we are the only ones who are feeling like this, the only ones that are going through this, number one, that's not true. But number two, that really isolates ourselves and tends to have a very negative impact on mental health. So recognizing that mistakes are an inevitable part of being a human being helps us to be more compassionate to ourselves and to others. And lastly, it's important to be mindful of your emotions. If you're upset about something, try to allow yourself to experience that emotion in a balanced way without suppressing it, like pushing it down so you're not feeling it, or getting completely swept up or overwhelmed by it. So it's important to recognize and allow ourselves to feel the emotion we're feeling at the time. Try not to judge yourself for having negative emotions either. That's a normal part of life, and we all feel negative emotions at some point in our lives, usually multiple times in our lives. That's just, again, a normal part of being a human being. And if you can remember that emotions come and go, like you're not going to experience them forever, it will help you not to become overwhelmed by your emotions. The last strategy we can use to improve our self-esteem is to get help from others. Often, this is the most important step a person can take to increase their self-esteem, but it can also be the most difficult. People who have low self-esteem don't often ask for help because they feel like they don't deserve it. But when we connect with another person and realize that we're not the only person going through these things or feeling these feelings, those other people can help drive out those messages we have received from those past experiences that have led to that low self-esteem. There are a couple different ways we can reach out to other people. We can ask for support from friends. So asking friends to tell you what they like about you or think you do well will help increase that self-esteem. Or asking someone who cares about you just to listen while you vent about something without actually trying to fix anything. Sometimes we just need somebody to listen to how we're feeling, and we just need to say it out loud. We can also ask a friend for a hug or ask someone who loves you to remind you that they do. Other people we can ask for help are teachers and other helpers in the school community. So getting help in school from advisors, teachers, and tutors is really important if somebody needs it, because school can be a major contributor to low self-esteem. If someone lacks self-confidence in certain areas, taking classes or trying new activities to increase their sense of competence in those areas can really help. For example, taking a math class, joining a dance club, taking swimming lessons. If somebody engages in those activities, they're going to increase their skills in those areas. And lastly, talking to a therapist or counselor can be really great for our self-esteem. Sometimes low self-esteem can feel overwhelming or difficult to overcome. That professional help, like talking to a counselor or a therapist, is a really good idea. Talking to a counselor is a good way to explore what a person's feeling and begin to explore their self-esteem. So these people, that is their job. Part of their job is to help other people deal with these feelings of low self-esteem and help them and give them strategies to overcome them. So sometimes that professional help is needed. And don't be afraid to seek it out. Well, this is the end of our talk on self-esteem, so I hope you have learned something about self-esteem and how to improve it.